Thank you for staying all this way. And hopefully you'll enjoy my talk. Today I'm going to just talk about how DAOs are governed and essentially like how they're designed and the different security and decentralized aspects of the different design decisions that they make. Now, we all love DeFi protocols basically because they're decentralized. They allow users to interact without any centralized party. And in that same vein, decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, were created as a way to own and govern DeFi protocols in a decentralized way, right? So in practice, the way that this happens is there's a DeFi application. There's generally what's called a governance contract, which is basically a smart contract that encodes all the rules for making a change in the DeFi application. And this governance contract is essentially owned by a DAO. And what does a DAO consist of? Well, a DAO basically consists of the group of the holders of basically the governance token, right? And so because the rules of governance are actually encoded in the governance contract, you can kind of think of this as basically like a constitution, right? And there are different design choices that each DAO is making in the process of actually governing, right? And you can only understand them really by actually looking through the governance contracts because they're code and actually mapping these different things out. So for example, you may think basically that, okay, there's a DAO, basically anybody that has a governance token can actually participate in governance. Turns out that's actually not true. DAOs a lot of times make decisions about who they actually want to allow to participate in their governance. For example, they may require that somebody actually put their tokens into a staking contract before they actually give them the right to vote. And these kinds of things are really important now because more and more different jurisdictions are actually allowing DAOs to basically register as companies. And essentially they're writing laws about what are the rules for basically being a DAO and registering there. And essentially this is something, for example, that I found in the Wisconsin DAO law. And essentially, if you look at the last thing, it says that the DAO can form if the underlying smart contract is able to be modified, updated, or otherwise upgraded. No idea what that really means. Basically, if you're talking about the DeFi protocol here, this is essentially the functionality of what a DAO does. If you're actually talking about the DAO contract, the governance contract itself, then updated by who? Does the judge have like basically a signing key? Does the government have it? Does it just mean that somebody that actually registered the LLC has it? So essentially, because of that, like we actually wanted to map out the entire design space of how a DAO is actually realized, okay, to make these kinds of things like clearer. And essentially, we looked at the top 51 DAOs on Ethereum by treasury size. We looked through basically all their smart contracts that are related to governance, their governance contract itself, and their developer documentation in order to come up with this beautiful table right here. Basically, if you take every column and pick a choice, you can actually realize a DAO. But instead of having you read all that, I'm just going to say that at a very high level, essentially, the governance of a DAO comes down to two decisions. First, they have to basically make the decision of who gets to have governance rights and who does not. And the second decision that they need to make is actually, what's the process of governing, okay? So who can actually make a proposal? How do you actually vote? How long does that take? And what's the rule that makes a proposal pass and eventually basically execute? So for the first part, let's look at actually who can participate in governance. And as I said before, one important aspect is that just owning the governance token is not enough. Most of the DAOs that we looked at, 39 out of 51, actually require you to register your wallets or your tokens before you actually get to exercise your voting rights, okay? And why require registration? Well, it's basically a form of gatekeeping. You basically want some people to vote, and you don't want some people to vote. Why not? Well, the second guy might be this guy. And we don't want Binance to actually vote because the tokens don't belong to them. They're holding them as custodians on behalf of other people. right? In terms of registration, there are generally two kinds of registration, verified and anonymous. The verified kind is very unpopular. Only 2 DAOs out of the 39 use it. And then the anonymous is very popular. Most of them use it. The reason that the verified is not popular is because essentially it's centralized, right? Like you need a government ID, you need a wallet. Essentially, you need to show it to some centralized ID that basically then tells you, okay, you can participate in our DAO now. All right, and in anonymous registration, all you basically need is a wallet address and you just say, register me, right? All you need to do is just hold some tokens in your wallet and that's it. Of course, the downside is you can make as many wallets as you want and essentially register all your wallets. And if you're actually like a malicious party, nobody actually has any idea how large you are. Yep, and the other way that registration happens is through other way that registration happens and voting power is assigned is actually through token holding and token staking. So in token holding, all you need to do is just have tokens in your wallet, right? Essentially, this means that anybody can just immediately get voting power and use it and basically sell it off again. And this is why a lot of DAO attacks happens. DAO attacks almost exclusively happen in DAOs that employ token holding as the way to assign voting power, because you can just get the tokens, you can use them for a malicious purpose, and then you can sell them again. In contrast, token staking, you actually have to put your tokens in there, they're actually locked. So basically, if you are going to attack a DAO, there's a big financial downside for you. And that's why a lot of attacks don't actually happen, because you can't just remove these tokens. But the downside of token staking is if you make the staking time too long. So for example, like in Curve, it really leads to centralization of voting power because people might not be willing to just put their tokens, because the tokens have some monetary value, they might not be willing to put their money into a protocol for, let's say, like years, like 1 to 4 years. And so this is a very important aspect, is that in order to get voting power in a staking protocol, you need to be vested monetarily, right? So a governance token has both a governance right and a monetary right. So you can vote with it, or you can put it in the public market and earn money doing it, right? And in DeFi, generally you have to take one of these decisions. You can either keep it and basically sacrifice this monetary incentive, or you actually exercise this monetary incentive, right? And in reality, what ends up happening is most people actually end up using the monetary right, and essentially custodians like CEXs, on-chain protocols, actually own a lot of these tokens. And in fact, for 44% of the DAOs that we looked at, there are more tokens that are in the markets than are actually being registered vote. So these tokens are more and more being basically used only for their monetary purpose. So now let's look at how governance power is exercised, right? Like what the process is. So this can be divided generally into 3 parts. So the first is basically what I call the pre-voting period. Essentially, this is where a proposal is proposed. The second part is the voting period. This is where the voting actually happens. There are different DAOs with different stipulations about what exactly you vote on. There's a post-voting period where actually the votes are aggregated, and essentially there's some rules to basically certify, okay, like the rules have been met, pass the proposal. The rules have not been met, don't pass the proposal. And after it's been certified, it gets executed. And at any point in time, they can also be canceled. So for the rest of the talk, I'm just going to look into just these 2 parts to give you an idea of sort of the different implications of the choices that DAOs make. So for certification, right, this happens after a voting period has passed, all the votes have been cast and basically counted. Certification, so it's generally done in 2 ways. So the first one is what I call decentralized certification, and here, anybody can basically certify that an election has happened. That a proposal has passed or not. So the rules for voting are encoded in the governance contract, and the rules for certification are encoded there. And basically, the governance contract just checks the rules, and it just says that it passed, right? It generally happens for DAOs with on-chain voting. Note here that you don't actually need a trusted third party, which you actually do sometimes when you're looking at centralized certification. Generally, this is done for DAOs with off-chain voting. So essentially, you have a trusted third party that actually brings the votes that happen off-chain on-chain. But obviously, because this is the party responsible for it, they can also just ignore this. Note that the centralized certification is actually what a lot of security councils are on layer 2s. That's essentially one of the main functions that they have, essentially being allowed to basically pass any proposal that they want, right? And then basically to kind of merge this divide between like decentralized and centralized, there's something called optimistic certification. And here it allows anybody to certify an off-chain vote by basically putting down some collateral. It's similar to basically like optimistic rollups, right? What you do essentially is you just put down some collateral and state that like this proposal has passed. You wait 2 days, proposal passes, right? Now, if you're malicious and you say that something passed that didn't pass, then somebody can challenge within the 2 days. But the problem here is actually, then you need some sort of a decision to be made. The thought is basically probably by an impartial third party, but this could also just be like the DAO, right? So the next part is the veto, and that just means somebody proposes, maybe the proposal has a bug in it, maybe it's a malicious proposal, and people just, somebody has the right to basically cancel this proposal, right? Because the DAO doesn't want that. And one thing that I will say is that a veto is something that is needed. And why? Because that's what a proposal actually looks like. And looking at this proposal, you wouldn't know it, but it had a bug in it. And this is a real proposal that was proposed in the ENS DAO. And actually, they did not have a way to veto anything. And so the bug was discovered after voting had started. And if this proposal had actually been passed, then anybody could have just executed this proposal and caused huge problems for the DAO, right? So the veto is very much needed. And with the veto power, there are generally 2 ways that people give this power. So the first is anybody that proposes the proposal, like the vote initiator, they get to basically cancel their proposal. It's a defensible choice because they made the proposal, they found something wrong with it, they cancel it, right? The second one, which causes a little more, which causes us to think a little more about the centralization and the security of a DAO, is this veto authority, right? Here, a specific authority has the power to veto basically any proposal, right? Even those that have like a majority of token holders voting for them, okay? And and actually, this is something that actually happens quite a lot. And for example, in this case, where in the Venus protocol, majority of token holders actually tried to leave, leave the DAO, take their whole treasury with them, but that was stopped by basically vetoing the proposal. Now, there's a lot of debate about whether that's actually a defensible choice, because technically it was the will of the people, because 51% of the token holders wanted to do this. But since the DAO had the veto authority, they actually canceled the proposal. And so now that we've gone through the entire a little bit of the design space, let me just show you why doing this exercise of just like dividing things up by the design space is actually helpful, because we can characterize very easily what can go wrong with DAOs. And let's take, for example, like this real world attack on the compound protocol that happened in September that almost caused a loss of 25 million. So they exploited 3 critical vulnerabilities of the compound governance contract. So the first one is anonymous registration. And essentially, if you look at all the forums and everything, the first thing you'll note is that like nobody had any idea how large the malicious party was. So they knew there was a malicious party. They made a lot of forums, but essentially they thought it was around 325K. It turned out to be over 680K, the size of the malicious party, meaning that essentially they were way off in what they thought how large this was. And this is essentially because of anonymous registration, right? Like part of the problem was the tokens were divided among 28 different wallet addresses who all got their tokens from basically Coinbase. And so nobody had any idea how big they actually were. The second one was this voter apathy and vote sniping. And so one thing is that there's on-chain voting. It has a cost. And people basically thought this proposal was going to fail, so they just didn't vote. And in the last 30 minutes, basically 582K votes were cast. And basically the proposal went from failing to passing. Now, there exist mechanisms that actually could have stopped this. There exist smart contracts. There exist DAO contracts that actually employ techniques to actually stop this. Compound did not, and actually a majority of the on-chain voting contracts that we looked at also don't have any, don't use any guardrails for this. They are also susceptible to this exact thing. And the third part is basically a lack of oversight, and this essentially means there was no veto authority. Like nobody could, because of the nature of this attack, it's a very dispensable choice if somebody had a veto authority could go in and basically say, okay, this seems wrong, and just cancel it. And in response, that's exactly what they did, is basically add a veto authority to cancel proposals. And so in conclusion, what we've done here is essentially classified DAOs along different security critical dimensions. There's always this problem in every level of basically decentralization versus basically security or usability that we run into. And so now if we actually go back to our initial example, it seems like just looking at it, I think our work actually gives people an understanding of essentially how to look at DAOs. And if you're saying that a DAO needs to do something, you can clearly state what that is, right? So essentially here, for example, maybe it's the case that they would like to have a certifier, right, within the DAO that can basically make a change. And this certifier belongs to the government, maybe belongs to the judge, who knows? But at least within the law, or lawyers or lawmakers can actually use this, or researchers can actually use this to actually create and design better DAOs and better laws. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you. So the way I see governance is that it's on the spectrum of being like very centralized, but very quick decisions and very comfortable. And then on the other spectrum is like very decentralized and what the DAO is.
Yeah.
But going forward, what's your view on like, is it to keep it decentralized? Are the current schemes going to be mechanisms are going to be fundamentally changed, or is just going to be more like stipulations, more additions added?
I think actually a lot of DAOs are already moving towards like a more centralized form of governance, at least with like a backdrop where like, you know, the token holders have a say. So for example, like one of the things that a lot of DAOs go towards is something I didn't cover here, but basically what I call like reactive voting. So here, essentially, you have a committee that basically makes the changes, and the changes pass after 2 days. But if the DAO doesn't like it, then the token holders still have a say to basically veto this thing, right?
So you mean like Lido dual governance?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think maybe Polygon or something has also implemented something similar, but something like something like this reactive voting, as I call it. It helps because like you can make changes like easily, and you don't actually need like the entire DAO to actually vote on literally everything, but they still have the option of actually stopping anything that they don't actually like to have passed. Yeah.
Hi. So you make a point about voter apathy here, and I'm curious if you think that there needs to be more constraints, or I guess like just better tracks or whatever for like delegates in a DAO, because like in a lot of DAOs we see, like especially, or actually no, I don't want to name names, but in DAOs that we see out there, there are like groups of contributors that are like really true, or they're true contributors in the sense that they like actively propose like new committees, operations, blah blah blah. They're like service providers, or maybe they're like individual contributors that it is basically a full-time job for them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have a lot of like we have a lot of voters that are, you know, completely voter apathetic, or they have like there's probably a pretty large number of voters that have like 0.5 of like a token, or like they have just like a very small negligible amount.
Yeah.
And so like, do you see like the DAO space trending to this area where like there is a I guess there's a divide between a contributor and a delegate in the future? And then do you think that it would be beneficial for DAOs to have like better voting increments, so to speak, or to try and filter out like all the noisy participants, or like the ones that have like very, very, very little say in some way?
So are you?
I know I'm
I think there are. I think what there needs to be probably is like a better way to just find delegates. I'm not sure how easy it is if you're just like, you know, you care about governance but you're not totally involved. How easy it is to just like find somebody that's just like, okay, I would like to just delegate my tokens to this guy. Regarding your question about like noisy delegates, do you mean in terms of like actual voting? Because I think in actual voting, noisy delegates probably have very little say in terms of the amount of votes that they actually cast. But if you mean in terms of like the what they say in the forums, I mean, maybe they impact some things, but I'm not quite sure.
I mean more so the former, honestly.
The former. So when you mean noisy delegates, I'm not sure how big of an impact at least they have on the Ethereum system, because the cost of voting is just so high. I think this might be a larger problem, probably, I would imagine, in like Arbitrum or like Optimism, or like places where DAO voting is a lot cheaper and people can just do it for like less than a cent. Something I haven't thought about what their impact is, but I would expect that like noisy voters would not have that large of a say, because I would expect that there's some sort of still like centralization in these DAOs where the top contributors are probably the ones who hold more votes and who actually determine whether a vote passes or not.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have any more questions?
One.
First you, and go there.
Thank you. I have actually a very subtle question. I know this research is for better informing regulators to regulate the DAOs. And so you mentioned about in order to exercise your voting rights through the tokens, you have two methods, either token holding or token locking. And it seems to me they both have the same downsides because they're both centralizing in some way. If you exercise the monetary rights, it goes to the people who value it. If it's about locking, only the people who value it will lock it. So do you observe the subtle difference of these two methods in the 51 DAOs you studied? How it affects the performance?
I think in general, like token locking has a higher effect on centralization than does token holding. That being said, it's not like the analysis that I did was not like a longitudinal study. It was more of just like taking a snapshot at a certain point and then evaluating different decentralization metrics there. So for example, one of the things that I looked at was the impact of token staking time to decentralization, and it essentially is the fact that, you know, like protocols like Curve, Angle, Frax, where basically you're using this V tokenomics where you get the maximum voting power if you lock it up for 4 years. They essentially are completely controlled by either Convex or Stake DAO or something like that. So I think, like, at least with token staking, it seems like there is a larger incentive to actually centralize. And the other part is actually like a lot of these like Convex and everything that allow you to actually stake through them. They give you they basically take your tokens. They actually can exercise the governance right that is from your token, yet this transformation is actually only one way. And so there isn't actually a way that you can get your money back other than basically through the public markets. And so I think that effect, for example, it like centralizes the DAO by a lot, because a lot of people, they don't want to, a lot of people just want to exercise the monetary rights. Like they don't really care about the governance rights, so they just give it away to these companies. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's actually the opposite of what I had in mind, but I would like to discuss you with this.
Sure, yeah. Absolutely.
Unfortunately, we've come up on time, so we're going to have to take the rest of the questions and discussion offline. So yeah, I think this concludes the talks for today. And yeah, please join us for the happy hour that's starting right now.